We have hit the road, and we're in Halifax. Good. And we have an incredible live audience. We didn't prompt them to do that at all. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea are all here live too. Let's get right to it. At issue, leaders head west. Mark Carney tries to win over BC and Alberta.
You don't need to tell me what Alberta's like. I'm from Alberta.
As Pierre Poilievre got a big push from Stephen Harper.
My choice, without hesitation, without equivocation, without a shadow of a doubt, is Pierre Poilievre.
The National is traveling across the country to hear from voters, like all of you, through the campaign. So we're here at the beautiful Halifax Central Library. So great to be here in person. So great to have these folks in person. You know them all, but I'll introduce them anyway. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for traveling. Okay, let's get right to it. We want to talk about the week that we've had so far. A couple of things have stood out, both time that was spent in the West, talk of Western alienation, an endorsement by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Chantal, I'll start with you. Where do you think we are in this kind of weird third week of the campaign?
Yeah, third weeks are rarely defining weeks, and some of the destinations are dictated by logistics. Next week, the debates will take place in Montreal, so all campaigns are going to head there for debate prep, which involves people faking that they are someone else so that the leader who is practicing believes that Mark Carney is actually standing there. So the Western Canada thing for third week also makes sense, especially for the Conservatives. They're not going to spend a lot of time in Alberta or Saskatchewan after this. Why? Because they've got this territory sewn up. BC for the Liberals, for all campaigns, for the NDP, makes a lot of sense. Why? Well, for the NDP, because survival goes through BC. If they lose BC, there's not going to be very much left of them, including their leader in the House of Commons. So they have to campaign there. The Liberals, same reason, but in the reverse. This is where they're hoping to gain off the NDP the most, because this is where the NDP has the most seats. Stephen Harper and the campaigns that I've covered, former prime ministers tend to show up when you need wind in your sails, when you don't manage to get it yourself. Pierre Trudeau campaigned twice in '84 for John Turner. Other prime ministers, Jean Chrétien at the tail end of 2011 showed up. It usually doesn't make a big difference.
And the fact that it was a very large rally, it was in Edmonton, which was kind of telling. The fact that you would bring out, I think it was maybe just because Mr. Harper was available in Alberta, but the fact that you would do that in Alberta, and the fact that the former Prime Minister was there for Pierre Poilievre, what does that tell you, Andrew?
It tells you it's not going terribly well for them, I think in three ways. One is, after enormous movement in the polls before the election, once the election campaign has started, it looks pretty baked in. Not a lot of movement has happened. The Tories have been throwing everything they can at Mark Carney. It doesn't seem to have dented his appeal amongst the people who find him appealing. So first thing. Secondly, it really does seem to have turned into a two-party race more than any race in my lifetime. Between the Conservatives and the Liberals might get 80% of the vote in this election. The last time that happened, I think, was in 1957, 58. This is unusual. And obviously, when the NDP vote is down, that's not good for the Conservatives. The third thing is, it seems to be very much driven by the leaders. Obviously, every election is, but more so than ever, I think. Mark Carney is polling ahead of Liberals. Pierre Poilievre is polling behind the Conservatives. It really does seem to be the case that a critical mass of the voters have taken a look at the two candidates, two leaders, and have said, I prefer Mark Carney. So the Tories are in a ditch right now, and they've got a relative little time left to dig themselves out of it.
And they seem to be talking and pointing to the rallies a lot. You've heard Mr. Poilievre himself say, look at how big these rallies were in these different places. And sure, that's a sign of support, but they seem to think that it is something bigger, that it is a sign of a broader movement. What do you make of those claims and the way they're positioning those things, Althea?
It's an interesting strategy because it reminds people of Donald Trump and how big his rallies were and how much he talked about his rallies. But it also reminds people, I think, of 2015, where the Liberals tried to use the rallies to show momentum. And I think that that is what the Conservatives were trying to show. It's harder when you don't have the media with you to be able to show that momentum night after night.
We'll talk about the media in the next part, yeah.
So I won't spend too much time on it. I don't think Mr. Harper's endorsement is shocking. I mean, of course, the Conservative Prime Minister was going to endorse Pierre Poilievre. It would have been news if he hadn't, frankly.
But he didn't endorse the last two. He didn't go out for Andrew Scheer. He didn't go out for
did
Aaron
endorse
O'Toole.
them. He did not
endorse them. He just
show
didn't do
up
a
on
big
In
the
a
stage.
Sure.
very public way, in a way like, to Chantal's point, Brian Mulroney was dished out in the last week of Aaron O'Toole's campaign. And they tried to do that a little bit with Brian Mulroney's memory through Caroline Mulroney last week. But what is more interesting is who is Pierre Poilievre talking to and why. So here, they're in Edmonton. The Liberals actually think they can pick up about 5 seats in Alberta. So there's a strategic reason why you want to go to Edmonton and re-energize the party faithful. But I also wonder if maybe they feel the writing is on the wall, and I say this believing that I think the Conservatives, there's a pathway still to victory. But if Mr. Poilievre wants to remain the Conservative Party leader, he needs to win a leadership vote if he loses. And one way he will do that is to continue to tack to the right, because that's where the grassroots is. So I think there's like 2 things happening at the same time.
But it's still a competitive race. It is not over. But pick up on whatever part you want there.
Well, first the rallies. Rallies they're supposed to project momentum, but they do not tell you the state of a campaign. If they did, Pierre Trudeau would have won. I was a very young journalist walking from work in Toronto, and you walk right next to Maple Leaf Gardens in '79. So I walked into a Liberal rally, convinced me that I didn't want to be someone holding but I did like politics. But there were 20,000 people in there. Well, Pierre Trudeau lost the election. It was interesting but meaningless. But in the case of the dynamics of this campaign, I think it's counterproductive. And why do I say that? Because the reality, and Andrew spoke about this, the reality is that the NDP and the Bloc vote, part of it, is flocking to the Liberals out of fear of Donald Trump, but also out of fear of Pierre Poilievre. And the more you show those big crowds to spooked voters, the more they're saying this guy could still win.
the opposite, yeah.
And it solidifies votes for the Liberals that Pierre Poilievre can't get. The best case scenario for him would be to find a way to send them home to the NDP and the Bloc. How do you do that if you spook them into thinking that they're not going to, that their parties won't win, and if they go back home, then Pierre Poilievre might win.
It's not just the size of the rallies, it's who goes out to them and what is the message they're hearing. So these are, love fests for Pierre Poilievre, love fests in particular for the most harsh culture war, vituperative edge of his campaign. They love that stuff. He loves that stuff, but that's not the kind of voter they need to reach. And I think in many ways this campaign has failed to take stock of the way that the electoral landscape changed post Justin Trudeau, post Trudeau's tariff war, post the entry of Mark Carney. They're still running the same ideas and the same approach that they did before that, and one of which is they still think it's all about ginning up the base, getting out the turnout, and not trying to appeal to people who aren't already in the base. And Tories go back and forth on this debate. They certainly placed their bets on the turnout strategy this time, and it's not working for them.
Last word to you, because that is, they need to broaden their coalition, and we don't know if that's being successful right now or if rallies do that. About a minute to you.
Andrew's right. The biggest problem is that they haven't shifted their strategy. Rallies are incredibly expensive and they're resource intensive. And the Conservatives used to tell us they would rather have people knocking on doors and identifying their voters than spending time and energy getting people who already converted out to rallies. And now that you're facing a very competitive election, you wonder why they have decided to pursue this strategy. But I think beyond that, what we've seen is that the Liberals have basically borrowed, stolen, whatever word you want to use, the Conservative Party's not necessarily exact policies, but some similar policies and some of their wording. And the Liberals are trying to basically nullify the policy issue so that the ballot issue is a question about leadership. And on that question, Mark Carney wins head and shoulders above Pierre Poilievre. And the Poilievre camp, the Conservative camp, has not adjusted yet. And I don't know why. We talked a little bit about this last week. Where's the team? Because there is a team, but they're not dishing him out.
Welcome back to Halifax. We're here at the Central Library with our amazing live studio audience. Let's get back to it. At issue, media relations. The Conservative campaign tightly controls which reporters get to ask which questions. This week, a reporter who wasn't approved to ask hers shouted it out.
Sorry, there's just a
Bonjour, Mr.
protester
Poirier.
here. Go ahead. All right.
It's a reporter trying to ask
Sorry.
you a legitimate
Is there
question.
we're listening.
All right, so what's to be made of how party leaders are dealing with the media? How is this affecting the campaign? How is it helping or hurting their strategies? Chantal, Andrew, and Althea all with me here in Halifax. I'm going to start with you, Andrew. We're asking this question because Pierre Poilievre has taken a particular approach to the media. There's no media on the campaign bus or plane, which is typical, but also because of the way he's restricting questions, choosing who gets questions, not allowing follow-ups, and sometimes even his people suggesting questions to the journalists. What do you make of this highly controlled approach?
Oh, and even further, cooping them up in little pens, on a giant parking lot, There's some people who say, well, this is very silly, that's a front-runner strategy where you try to avoid questions to play it safe. Why are you doing that when you're behind? My theory is it's not about avoiding questions. I think the intent is to humiliate and confront. I think they're still locked in this idea of our base loves it when we confront the media. Our base loves it when we engage in a confrontational tone with them. This will make the media mad. It'll make us look like we're in control and dominating them.
Right.
And this will play really well at home.
Sure.
I can't imagine that's helpful to them with anybody other than their committed followers, but they are so locked into this. I think it's instinctive for them. He learned this from Harper, who used to do it as well. The odd thing is, whenever either Poilievre or Harper actually take questions, they're really good. Yeah. They're articulate, intelligent people. They're good spokesmen for their cause if they could just get outside their own heads, if you will.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre could take a question from anybody. He's not a new politician, unlike Mark Carney.
It's not like he doesn't know his brief.
Yeah. What do you think, Althea?
Although I don't think we've seen that. When he's in a long-form podcast, you just did one with a Quebec host, his answers are thoughtful. You may or may not agree with what he's saying, but he can express his point of view, and he's not shy of actually addressing the substance of the question. I think that they wanted to just control the message very clearly so that there would not be, questions about abortion or a question about Bill 21 or questions about any tricky issues that were not on the core things that they wanted to talk about. And so without, taking a follow-up question away from a reporter, so usually the reporter asks a question, the politician speaks, and then you say, well, you didn't really answer my question, refocusing so that the person can elaborate on what their thought is. Taking that away because they have somebody holding the microphone and taking it back means that he can just say whatever talking point he wants to say, and the voter and the journalist who's reporting on this is not well served because there's nothing. But it's more than just that strategy. The other part of the strategy is, and we, the media, are complicit in this because we've allowed it to happen, he goes on for 30 minutes, 15 minutes in French, 15 minutes in English about whatever he wants to say. That is broadcast on TV, and then he takes 4 questions and no follow-ups. And yes, everything you said is accurate about trying to shape some of the, especially local journalists' questions. But at some point, we should be speaking out and saying, this is outrageous. You're not even giving us equal time to ask questions. And you want to be the prime minister of the country, and you're not accountable now? At what point do we believe that you will be accountable, that you will be willing to submit yourself to questions that are not just talking points that you want us to cover?
Let's get Chantal in.
To go back to your point about he's able to answer questions.
Yeah.
It goes beyond that. Some of the better days that Pierre Poilievre has had reaching outside his tent have been days when he was challenged by some of his own members on abortion rights or same-sex marriage and had to come down with a very clear position. So the notion that he would fear questions on abortion or any question boggles my mind. I think they kind of outplayed themselves with the strategy of not having a media tour on the plane for stupid reasons. They're not getting all the coverage that they would like. I'm in Montreal. I'm trying to find, it's early in the morning, I have to do radio. I know Stephen Harper showed up in Edmonton. I want to see what happened there before I go on radio. I go through the entire media. I find 2 big websites, I'm not going to name them, but mainstream organizations, they still have stories up that say Stephen Harper is going to introduce Pierre Poilievre, and I'm thinking, did I miss this? Was it not last night? Finally, the CBC has it. But the reason why it's not getting that coverage has to do also with logistics. If you are not on a leader's plane, and you need to follow that leader, you need to travel to the next morning's venue overnight. You also need to find a place to sleep. And you need to drive. So you may not be doing the rallies because you need to get to whatever place. So logistically, they're losing out, but also the penning and parking lots. Their strategy means there are a lot more local reporters who will show up. It's not a good idea to mistreat local reporters. They're not disliked in their communities, and they tell those stories because they don't live in that environment in the way that people who cover Parliament Hill all the time and cover campaigns do. So for me, I don't really care how I'm treated in a campaign. I also think Stephen Harper treated us a bit better than what I've been seeing, to be fair to him. But I believe that they are shooting themselves in the foot in the way that they've handled this.
And on this, because I'm not trying to make this about the media, but why does it matter why we're talking about this? Why does it matter?
It matters. I mean, on one level, you can say, look, they're entitled to their own electoral strategy, and at one point that is. But they're also under an obligation, I think, maybe in their own larger self-interest, to be accountable. And like it or not, we, as imperfect as we are part of the instrument by which they are held to account. So is Parliament, so is the law courts, et cetera. But if you're not willing to subject yourself to that, some of the voters who are looking at you are going to draw their own conclusions. Why aren't you willing to do this? They're also passing up on the opportunity that so-called earned media reporting affords. Look at what Mark Carney's doing. Now, he has the advantage of being the prime minister at a time of crisis. But my God, is he milking it? You know, he goes out and he does these press conferences and he puts on this very somber face and he announces to the country what's just happened to us. And, I think he gains every time he does that, even though he's not doing it through a YouTube video. He's actually using the media. Well, it turns out that actually helps.
Okay, we got to leave this part there. Thank you all very much. This part was great. But we are going to be back from Halifax tomorrow, too. We're going to have more on Friday night, and that part will be about the audience. They're going to ask some of their best questions, how they're going to make a decision for this election, and we'll do our best to answer them.